The baobab trees stood sentinel against the star-drunk sky, their ancient trunks bearing witness to another midnight gathering of the Amara people. In the village's heart, where the sacred fire cast dancing shadows across weathered faces, elder, Kessie raised her gnarled hand for silence. The assembled community, mothers clutching their children, fathers with worry etched deep in their brows, grandmothers whose eyes held the weight of countless seasons, fell into reverent quiet. The spirits have spoken, Kissie's voice carried across the circle like wind through dry grass. Tonight, the Nightwalker must choose. Young Asha pressed closer to her grandmother's side, her 6-year-old mind struggling to comprehend the gravity settling over her people like morning mist. She had heard whispers of the Nightwalker throughout her short life, fragments of conversations that ceased when children drew near, hushed tones that spoke of ancient duty and terrible necessity. In the hut furthest from the fire, Django cradled his 3-month-old son Kato against his chest. The infant's breathing was shallow, labored, a sound that had haunted the young father's dreams for weeks. The child's skin, once rich as fertile earth, had taken on an ashen pallor that no amount of traditional medicine could remedy. Django's wife, Amani, sat beside them, her tears long since dried into salt tracks down her cheeks. "He grows weaker each day," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the night sounds. Perhaps it is time." Django's jaw tightened. He understood the weight of her words, the terrible choice that faced them. In the world beyond their village, doctors and hospitals might offer hope. But here, where the spirits of their ancestors dwelt in every stone and tree, where the old ways held dominion over life and death, there was only one path for a child, who walked the boundary between worlds. Elder Kissie approached their dwelling, her bare feet making no sound on the packed earth. Behind her walked Nuru, the tribe's spiritual guide, his face painted with the sacred ochre that marked him as an intermediary between the living and the ancestral realm. In his weathered hands he carried a small gourd filled with the blessed, water from the hidden spring, water that had never known the touch of sunlight. "Django, son of my heart," Kessie's voice was gentle but unwavering. "The spirits call to your child. He has been chosen as this season's Nightwalker." The young father's arms tightened around his son. Every instinct screamed against what he knew must come. Yet he also understood the honor being bestowed upon his family. For generations beyond counting, the Amara had practiced this sacred ritual, and no child chosen as a Nightwalker had ever been forgotten by their people. "When?" Amani asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "At the hour when night surrenders to dawn," Nuru replied, his eyes reflecting the wisdom of one who had guided many families through this sacred transition. "When the veil between worlds grows thin, and the ancestors reach out to welcome their own." As if sensing the gravity of the moment, little Kato stirred in his father's arms, his dark eyes opening to gaze up at the faces surrounding him. For a heartbeat, his breathing seemed to ease, and a faint smile touched his tiny lips, a smile that would be remembered and cherished for generations to come. The Nightwalker had been chosen, and the ancient wheels of destiny had begun to turn. The history of the Nightwalker stretched back to the time when the Amara first settled in the shadow of the great mountains, when their ancestors fled the terrible drought that had claimed so many tribes. Elder Kessie remembered the stories as her own grandmother had told them, passed down through generations like precious seeds carefully tended and planted anew in each young heart. 700 seasons ago, when the rains failed for 7 consecutive years, the Amara found themselves dying slowly, their children growing thin as reeds, their livestock mere shadows of bone and hide. It was then that the first Nightwalker appeared, not chosen but born of desperation and love. A woman named Zara, whose infant son lay dying in her arms, had walked into the sacred grove at midnight, pleading with the ancestors for guidance. "The Kaunai," spirits answered. They showed her a vision, her child, healed and whole, living not in the physical realm but in the space between worlds, serving as a bridge between the living and the dead. In exchange for this sacrifice, for that is what it was, though cloaked in ritual and necessity, the spirits would ensure the survival of the tribe. The rains would return, the land would flourish, and no Amara child would ever die forgotten or unmourned. But there was more to the tradition than mere survival. The children chosen as Nightwalkers were not simply taken, they were transformed. In the days following the ritual, their spirits would return to guide their people through dreams and visions, offering wisdom in times of crisis, comfort in moments of despair, and protection against the forces that threatened the community's harmony. Django's own great-grandfather had been a Nightwalker, chosen during a plague that had swept through the region like wildfire. The stories told of how his spirit had appeared to the tribal healers, showing them which roots and leaves could cure the sickness, which rituals could cleanse the contaminated waters. Dozens of lives had been saved through his guidance, and his sacrifice had become legend. Now, as Django sat in the pre-dawn darkness, he felt the weight of that legacy pressing down upon him. The rational part of his mind, the part that had been touched by the outside world during his brief time in the distant city, rebelled against what was to come. But his heart, rooted deep in the soil of his ancestors, understood the profound truth that lay beneath the ritual. Amani moved about their small dwelling, preparing the traditional garments that Cato would wear during the ceremony. The fabric was white as fresh milk, embroidered with symbols that told the story of their lineage, each thread a prayer for safe passage between worlds. Her hands moved with practiced precision, though Django noticed the way they trembled slightly as she worked. "Tell me again about your brother," she said quietly, not looking up from her sewing. Django closed his eyes, remembering. His younger brother, Tao, had been chosen as a Nightwalker 15 years ago, taken by a fever that no earthly medicine could break. The grief had nearly destroyed their family, yet in the months that followed, Tao's presence had been felt in countless ways, in the sudden appearance of water during a dry spell, in the warning dreams that had saved the village from raiders, in the gentle breeze that had guided lost children home. "He comes to me sometimes in dreams," Django said, his voice soft with wonder. "He looks as he would have had he grown to manhood, strong, wise, with our father's eyes and mother's smile. He tells me things, where to hunt, when storms are coming, how to heal minor ailments. He is more present in death than many are in life." Outside, the night sounds began to shift as dawn approached. Soon the ritual would begin, and their son would join the ranks of the Nightwalkers. The thought both terrified and comforted Django, for he knew that in losing Cato to this world, they would gain him in another, transformed, empowered, eternal. As the first pale fingers of dawn touched the horizon, the entire village gathered in the sacred grove where the ancient ceremonies had been performed for countless generations. The trees here were older than memory, their gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like arthritic fingers grasping for the realm of spirits. Moss hung from their limbs like prayer shawls, and the ground beneath was carpeted with leaves that had fallen through centuries of seasons. At the grove's center stood the threshold stone, a massive boulder worn smooth by wind and rain, its surface covered with intricate carvings that told the story of every Nightwalker who had made the journey before. Tonight, Cato's name would be added to that sacred record, his brief life honored alongside the dozens who had preceded him. Nuru began the ceremony with the calling of names, his voice rising and falling in the ancient cadence as he spoke aloud, the identity of every Nightwalker in the tribe's history. With each name, a member of the community stepped forward to place a white flower at the base of the threshold stone until the granite was surrounded by a garden of remembrance. Django carried his son through the gathered crowd, Amani walking beside him with quiet dignity. Cato was dressed in the ceremonial garments his mother had prepared, his tiny form seeming to glow in the pre-dawn light. The infant's breathing had grown even more labored during the night, his small chest rising and falling with visible effort. It was clear to all present that his time in the physical world was drawing to a close, whether through the ritual or the inexorable progress of his illness. "The boundary grows thin," Elder Casey observed, her weathered hand touching the child's forehead. "He is already walking between worlds." The revelation of Cato's true condition had come 3 nights prior, when Nuru's meditation had been interrupted by a vision. He had seen the child's spirit, already partially separated from his physical form, standing at the edge of a great chasm that separated the realm of the living from the domain of the ancestors. The infant was not dying in the conventional sense. He was being called, chosen by forces beyond mortal understanding to serve as a bridge between worlds. This was the true secret of the Nightwalkers, known only to the spiritual leaders and the families directly involved. The children chosen for this sacred role were not healthy infants randomly selected for sacrifice. They were souls who had been born with one foot in each realm, their life force already flowing between the physical and spiritual worlds. The ritual did not end their lives. It completed a transformation that had begun in the womb. "He will not suffer," Nuru assured the grieving parents. "The passage is gentle for those who are called. His spirit is eager to embrace its destiny." As if in response to the spiritual guide's words, Cato's eyes opened, and for a moment they seemed to hold depths far beyond those of a 3-month-old infant. His gaze moved across the assembled faces with an awareness that sent whispers of awe through the crowd. When his eyes found his parents, he smiled, not the reflexive expression of a baby, but something deeper, more profound, as if he were offering them comfort and assurance. The sun crested the mountains as Nuru began the final phase of the ceremony. He lifted Cato from his father's arms and carried him to the threshold stone, placing the infant gently on the warm granite surface. The child did not cry or struggle. Instead, he gazed up at the lightening sky with an expression of peaceful anticipation. The spiritual guide began to chant in the old language, his words calling upon the ancestors to receive their newest guardian. The assembled community joined their voices to his, creating a harmony that seemed to resonate through the very stones beneath their feet. As the chanting reached its crescendo, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the ancient trees, and the first ray of direct sunlight touched Cato's face. In that moment of perfect illumination, the transformation began. The child's labored breathing eased, his features taking on an otherworldly serenity. His spirit, visible to those with the sight as a luminous outline surrounding his physical form, began to separate and expand, growing brighter as it prepared to assume its new role as a guardian between worlds. The Nightwalker was ready to begin his eternal watch. What happened next defied the understanding of those who lived solely in the physical realm, yet to the Amara, it was as natural as the rising sun or the changing seasons. As Cato's spirit separated from his failing body, the boundary between worlds dissolved, revealing the truth that had always existed beneath the veil of ordinary perception. The sacred grove filled with presence, not visible to the naked eye, but felt by every soul present. The Nightwalkers who had come before stood among the living, their ethereal forms shimmering like heat waves rising from sun-warmed stone. They had come to welcome their newest brother, to guide him through the transformation that would make him their equal in the realm between life and death. Django felt his brother Tao's hand upon his shoulder, warm and reassuring despite belonging to one who had passed beyond the physical world 15 years ago. Amani gasped as she sensed her own grandmother's presence, the woman who had raised her after her parents' death now standing beside her in spirit, offering comfort in this moment of profound transition. Elder Kizi, her ancient eyes gleaming with tears of joy rather than sorrow, spoke to the assembled community. "Behold the truth that our ancestors knew. Death is not an ending, but a doorway. Our children do not leave us. They become our guardians, our guides, our eternal protectors." The infant Cato's physical form lay peaceful and still upon the threshold stone, but his spirit, now visible to all as a being of pure light, stood among the gathered Nightwalkers. He appeared as he would have in life, had he been granted years to grow. A young man of noble bearing, his face bearing traces of both his parents' features, his eyes holding the wisdom of ages. "My son," Django whispered, reaching out toward the luminous figure. The spirit of Cato turned toward his father, and when he spoke, his voice carried the harmonies of wind through grass, of water over stone, of all the natural forces that connected the physical and spiritual realms. I am more than your son now, Father. I am the guardian of our people, the keeper of the threshold, the bridge between what was and what will be. Through me, the ancestors will speak. Through me, the living will find guidance. Through me, the circle of existence remains unbroken. The revelation continued as Nuru explained to the younger members of the community what many of the elders had long understood. The Nightwalkers were not victims of ancient superstition, but willing participants in a cosmic duty that ensured the survival and prosperity of their people. Each child chosen for this role had volunteered for the service before their birth, their souls making a sacred pact with the forces that governed life and death. The proof of this truth could be found in the tribe's history. For 7 centuries, the Amara had thrived while other communities fell to drought, disease, war, and famine. Their crops had never failed completely. Their children had been protected from the worst ravages of illness. Their hunters had always found game when starvation threatened. This prosperity was not the result of luck or skill alone, but of guidance from the Nightwalkers who watched over them from the realm between worlds. As the sun climbed higher, the spiritual presence in the grove began to fade, but not before. Each Nightwalker had offered a blessing to the living. They touched the foreheads of children, whispered wisdom to the elders, and offered strength to those who struggled with doubt or fear. Their message was clear. The bonds of love and kinship transcended the boundary between life and death, and no soul was ever truly alone. Cato's spirit was the last to fade from view, but before he departed for his eternal vigil, he approached his parents one final time. His luminous form embraced them both, filling them with a peace that surpassed understanding. In that moment, they felt not loss but completion, the certainty that their child had found his true purpose and would watch over their family for all the generations to come. "Remember us not with sorrow but with joy," he whispered, his voice already growing distant as he assumed his place among the eternal guardians. "For we are never gone, only transformed." 3 months had passed since Cato's transformation, and the village of the Amara bore witness to the truth of their ancient traditions. The rains had come early and generous that season, filling the rivers and nourishing the crops beyond all expectation. The hunting parties returned with abundant game, and the herds of cattle and goats grew fat on the lush grasslands. But it was not merely material prosperity that marked the presence of their newest Nightwalker. In the weeks following the ceremony, the people began to experience dreams of startling clarity and meaning. Farmers dreamed of which fields would yield the best harvests. Healers received visions of new remedies for old ailments, and mothers found themselves guided by gentle intuition in caring for their children. Django had become the keeper of these accounts, recording each instance of guidance and protection in the tribal histories. His grief had transformed into something deeper and more profound, a understanding that his son's purpose had been far greater than any earthly life could have contained. The test of their faith came when a group of strangers arrived at the village, researchers from the distant city who had heard rumors of the tribe's unusual practices. They came with cameras and notebooks, seeking to document what they assumed were primitive superstitions ripe for academic study. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, an anthropologist who had grown up in the region before pursuing her education abroad, served as their translator. She approached Elder Kessie with the mixture of scientific curiosity and cultural shame that often marked those who had left traditional communities for the modern world. "I need to understand," she said in the old language, her words careful and respectful despite her obvious skepticism. "You claim that children who die in your rituals become protective spirits. Surely you realize that this is psychological comfort, not supernatural reality." Elder Kessie smiled with the patience of one who had encountered such doubt many times before. "Come," she said simply, "witness for yourself." That night, Dr. Okonkwo experienced something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about: the nature of reality. In her dreams, she found herself standing in the same sacred grove where Cato's transformation had taken place. The Nightwalkers were there, not as figments of imagination, but as beings of undeniable presence and power. Cato himself approached her, his spirit form radiating warmth and compassion. "You seek truth with your mind," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in her very bones. But truth lives in the heart, in the connections that bind all life together. Your people have forgotten this wisdom, but it has not forgotten them. He showed her visions of the tribe's past, times of crisis averted through spiritual guidance, disasters prevented by warnings that came through dreams, children saved by healing knowledge that arrived precisely when needed. Each event was documented in the tribal histories witnessed by dozens of people, undeniable in its reality. Your science seeks to explain the how of existence, Cato continued. Our wisdom embraces the why. Both are necessary, both are true. The question is not whether spirits can guide the living, but whether the living have the courage to listen. Dr. Okonkwo woke from the dream with tears streaming down her face, her worldview fundamentally altered by what she had experienced. When she tried to explain to her colleagues what had happened, they dismissed her account as the result of suggestion and cultural immersion. But she knew better. She had encountered something that transcended the boundaries of conventional understanding. In the days that followed, she observed the village with new eyes. She saw the way children played without fear, their laughter echoing through the hills like music. She watched as disputes were resolved with wisdom that seemed to come from beyond ordinary human insight. She witnessed healers working with knowledge that had been passed down through generations of nightwalkers, their success rate far exceeding what modern medicine might expect in such a remote location. When it came time for the research team to leave, Dr. Okonkwo made a choice that surprised everyone, including herself. She remained in the village, not as an observer studying primitive customs, but as a student learning ancient wisdom. She began the long process of unlearning the assumptions that had shaped her education, opening her heart to truths that her ancestors had known but that the modern world had forgotten. Years later, she would write in her journal, "I came seeking to document the delusions of a backward people. Instead, I discovered a sophisticated understanding of existence that makes our Western philosophy seem childish by comparison. The Nightwalkers are not victims or symbols of superstition. They are guardians, bridges, living proof that love transcends the boundaries we imagine separate life from death. In losing their physical forms, they gain something far greater, the ability to serve, to protect, to guide their people through the challenges that face every human community. And in the sacred grove where the threshold stone stood covered, with the names of the eternal guardians, Cato's spirit smiled. His sacrifice had borne fruit beyond measure, touching not only his own people but reaching out to heal the divisions between traditional wisdom and modern understanding. The circle remained unbroken, the bridge between worlds grew stronger, and the ancient covenant between the living and the dead continued to flourish. The Nightwalkers kept their eternal watch, and their people thrived under the protection of love that had transcended mortality itself.